All right, let's turn our attention to other stories now. For most Nigerians who lived in dread of yet another petroleum price increase, the Minister of State for Petroleum, Ibe Kachiku, has assured that there is no such plan for increase in the prices of petroleum products.
Kachiku's assurance was buttressed by Group Managing Director of NNPC, Mekanti Baru, shortly after a closed-door meeting with President Muhammadu Buhari. Kachiku and Baru directed journalists to talk to the Petroleum Product Pricing and Regulatory Agency for further clarification. All marketers had indicated an intention to increase prices of petroleum products, citing the continued scarcity of foreign exchange needed to finance importation as the reason. All right, joining us is an oil and gas expert. Who better to be speaking with than Bala Zakka himself? Good morning.
Good morning.
And
Baraka de Sallah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Wasn't it your birthday yesterday?
Yes, it was
Happy
my
birthday.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's wonderful. So having your birthday close to Salah.
Correct.
It's a double barrel celebration.
My birthday was on S and Salah was on S.
Wow.
You know,
That's
Sunday and Salah.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
That's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
All right. So,
you remember the last time we were on this program, I told you we'll look for, I'm going to try to see how we can influence our producers for us to talk about this.
And I remember we awarded you an honorary PhD in geology.
Well, here we are discussing this again today. But let's come to the reality of things. There is always the issue of panic when there's the speculation. Maybe a word comes out, I don't know where it comes from, but sometimes, even though the government sometimes will come and say, well, it is not true this is going to be, especially when it comes to prices of petroleum products, it's about to go up and all of that. But we see these things happening sometimes. Now, from your perspective, economically and realistically, what can lead to price hike at this time?
Well, so many things can lead to price hike. Most importantly, external factors. But in the case of Nigeria, you know, they're actually internal factors, which we call internalities. And interestingly, you know, you can't believe it, but it's the reality. You can control your system, your economy, your corporation, an entity, if the factors are internal, because they are within what you can manage. But if they are external factors, you know, then you have to contend with so many things, you know. Every time we talk about it, the crude oil is an international commodity, right? The price of crude oil is determined by the interplay of what we call externalities or external factors that are beyond our control. But the management, the domiciliation, the domestication internally, you know, the self-sufficiency have to do with internalities and internal factors within our own control. So I stand probably to be challenged, but you see, the good thing about programs like this is when you are beamed to the entire world, we learn from others, the viewers, and we share our little experiences. As far as I am concerned, what we are going today in Nigeria is 100% self-inflicted. And it is based on that that I stand to have debate with anybody. Our problems in Nigeria are 100% self-inflicted. But you know the good thing again about self-inflicted injuries? You can actually avoid them if you're ready to learn your lessons.
And you have the magic wand to also get it off.
Well, that's where, you know, you now bring the right people. You know, when you talk about square pegs in round holes, it doesn't mean you can't
force it in.
Well,
let's even, we will come to that.
Okay.
We
that
will
also
definitely
be internally self-inflicted.
Yes, we will come to that. But in what ways, if you can, itemize the wrong moves that we have made over time? You know, that of course you say it's self-inflicted.
100%.
In what ways?
The first thing is, or the first thing has always been planlessness or lack of planning and refusal to think generationally. remember, just help me to remember these two keywords, Anna. Refusal to plan and refusal to think and plan generationally. And let me start breaking down simply. Today we talk about falling prices of crude oil, but I can tell you, it wasn't falling prices of crude oil that made us not to be able to construct the second Niger bridge. It wasn't falling prices of crude oil that made us not to be able to construct the East-West Road. It wasn't falling prices of crude oil that made our refineries not to be working today.
True.
You guys, they can be as elementary as that. Every time you talk about agriculture, people should go back to the farms, people should go. It wasn't falling prices of crude oil that made us not to have fertilizer plants scattered all over Nigeria. Meanwhile, you're talking about people going to the farms, right? It was not falling prices of crude oil that made us not to expand the ports of Calabar, Port Harcourt, and Warri, so that we can have what? Lagos port decongested. It was not falling prices of crude oil that reduced Nigeria to a country of one visible international airport.
So what you're saying is, if we were to implement some of these things that you're lining out now,
yes,
we can actually turn the situation around.
Correct. Then the need to think and plan generationally is this. You know, if you think and plan generationally, then you can sow a seed today that should or possibly outlive you. And that simply means you can start a rail project or a rail line project, but the intention is this: probably in 20 or 30 years, that rail line or railroad will be stable and good for Nigerians to benefit from.
See, I get the point you're making, but is it possible to make these projections? You're talking about making projections and planning.
Yes.
But can you do that without adequate data? You remember, Mike, that we had a guest here in the studio who talked about, look, any of all of these policies are total non-starters if we don't have proper data in place to say whether it's in Surulere, how many people are there, in Agege, wherever across Nigeria, how many people do you have? How many young people, how many elderly, and all of that?
We're still going back to the same thing. The first question you ask yourself is this: am I even willing to plan? You know, so if you're willing to plan, then you start asking yourself the tools you require for effective planning. So data is one of the many tools you require for effective planning. But like we said, you see, I always remember one example that I give people in Nigeria, amongst the many examples. I know we're discussing oil and gas. Every time I sit down, you know, and I travel to places, especially in Lagos, you go to Lekki, you see Jakonde Estate. You go to a place as far back as Igondo, you see a Jakonde Estate. And all you need to do is you ask, when did this man called Jakonde exist? When was he a governor? You discover that he was a governor probably more than 30 years ago. That is how to think and plan generationally. It simply tells you that as far back as 30 years ago, somebody went into the bush, then called those places bush, you know, and build or construct those structures. Why did he do that? Because the projection and the thinking generationally was that one day expansion, development will get to these places.
It's the same thing with Shagari.
It doesn't.
Shagari low cost
Exactly. So it simply means, and the Gowon estates. Because most of these places where you see Gowon estate, Shagari low cost, Jakonde estate, 30, 40 years ago, those places were like, you can even describe them as thick forests. But some people then sat down and felt, I may not be alive, but let me put one or two things that will lead to development. One day, my children or children or Nigerians are likely to expand.
All right, if you're just joining us, you're watching TVC Breakfast, and on this segment, we are discussing the concern of Nigerians that they could be the hike in prices of petroleum products. But the government has come out to say that no, there is nothing like that.
No
We're
such
discussing this and looking at the implications as far as we're narrowing it down to the realities on ground. And we have Bala Zakka with us in the studio, an oil and gas expert, discussing this. Well, first of all, let's give you this information. The fall of crude oil prices and the cost of importing fuel have been given as the cause of the reason in the fuel price increase in recent times.
Okay, so let's take a look at what goes into the pricing of fuel in Nigeria. The Petroleum Products and Pricing Regulatory Agency, the PPPRA, listed some of the cost elements of pricing fuel as costs of the product and freight, lightering, expenses, jetty throughput and storage charges, payments to the Nigerian Ports Authority and Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA, among others, contribute to the landing cost of the product, and this stands at 122.03 naira per litre.
122 naira, 3 kobo, something.
03 kobo.
03 kobo. All right. Now, but the distribution margins of retailers and dealers, transporters, allowances, marine transport average, administrative charges make up 18 naira, 37 kobo of the fuel price. Now, add that to 122 naira, 3 kobo. The total cost you get is 140 naira, 40 kobo.
The PPPRA therefore pegged the retail price band between 135 and 145 naira per litre. According to the agency, the true estimated cost of fuel per litre is 243.05 naira. So let's take a look at the increase in fuel price in the past few years.
In the first quarter of 2012, during the Goodluck Jonathan administration, fuel pump price was increased to 141 naira per litre. But the move was largely criticized by Nigerians. Now, it was reduced to 97 naira that same quarter. In the first quarter of 2015, President Jonathan reduced the price of petrol to 97 naira. And in the second quarter of 2015, then, when President Muhammadu Buhari assumed office, the price or pump price of petrol was reduced to 86 naira after 86 naira 50 kobo.
Now, in the second quarter of 2016, subsidy on petrol was removed, putting the price retail cap at 145 naira per litre. Now, major oil marketers are calling for total deregulation of the sector, saying the current 145 naira per litre is no longer realistic as it does not correspond with the price determining components of the commodity and the fluctuations of the foreign exchange rate. Now, at more than 300 naira to a dollar, it's around 400 now, as a matter of fact. And the marketers want a petrol price of 165 naira per litre. Okay, back to you, Zakka. The IPMAN and, of course, Moman, the oil majors and the independent marketers, they're asking that government should remove the cap of 145 and allow market forces to determine the price, and they're now even talking about 165 naira. Is 145 naira really, considering all of the factors that these marketers have put forward for asking for an increase? Is 145 realistic? Is it sustainable?
First of all, I sympathize with IPMAN, but it's not the fault of IPMAN. It's the fault of leaders or government. In difficult moments, the only constituency you look up to is the leadership constituency. But let me tell you, the biggest mistake we will continue to do as Nigeria is to talk about deregulation of sectors. There are probably 4 restructuring mechanisms for economic sectors that you can look at, amongst many. One is deregulation. You have commercialization, you have privatization, and you have liberalization. So we have to be very, very careful. for an economy that is as weak as Nigeria, if you continue to deregulate some sectors without thinking through, you will collapse and destroy that country. The Nigerian economy is too weak for the government of this country to continue to allow some sectors to be deregulated without thinking through, especially when you look at the economic implications. In the case of Nigeria, in fact, before I get to that point, I just want to say one thing. What is bedeviling the Nigerian oil and gas industry is the same thing that is bedeviling our cocoa production. We produce so much cocoa, but we cannot produce chocolate. We don't have chocolate. Rather, people travel abroad and they come back and children are jumping, dancing, with chocolate. Meanwhile, the raw material came from here.
Yes.
What is happening is the same thing that is happening to us when you talk about cassava. You have so much cassava, but you don't have ethanol. You still cannot boast of cassava flour or bread. You know, what is happening to the oil and gas is the same thing that is happening, you know, to us. You're supposed to be a country with so much endowment of gas. In fact, we are more of a gas nation than an oil nation.
Yes.
But you don't have one effective or efficient fertilizer plant. And you are saying you want to be a country that will want to be self-sufficient in terms of food. When you look at the oil and gas industry, the biggest mistake Nigeria will continue to do, we've used all kinds of terminologies to even show how we've been ridiculed. Ordinarily, we're supposed to be the oil and gas hub for the continent of Africa. By nature's geographical placement, if you look at the position of Nigeria, whether you come through the Atlantic Ocean, whether you talk about natural endowment, whether you even talk about brains, whether you talk about the population, we have all this. And that was why we started by saying everything is self-inflicted. The biggest mistake we will do is to deregulate the Nigerian oil and gas industry, especially the downstream sector. Let me tell you something that. But
where exactly are we now? Is it deregulated? Is it liberalized?
It is partially
deregulated? Where exactly is that sector right now?
As far as I'm concerned, it's only the government that will explain. But as far as I'm concerned, I think the sector has been deregulated, and that will continue to remain dangerous.
All right,
the only
what is
person
it
that
supposed
will
to be?
come to the worst you can do to the oil and gas industry is to liberalize it. And that's why many of us said a lot of people don't know the difference between liberalization, deregulation, commercialization, and privatization. A lot of people are saying the telecom sector has been deregulated. It has been no, it wasn't deregulated. It was liberalized. Liberalized. That's why a particular communication service provider cannot charge just 200 naira per minute for a call, because it's checked, it's controlled. When you liberalize, you allow government entities or whatever to also exist. And if they will die due to inefficiency, let them die at that point. That's why nobody is having sympathy for Nitel today. Because you allow other players to come in, and it died a natural death. You should do it. That is the worst thing you should do. But in the case of Nigeria, you should even protect it. What other, we're talking about planning. We're talking about refusal to think and plan generationally. And I will still go back. It is because of lack of planning. That is why you don't have our area market that we used to hear about, an Onitsha market. It's just because of lack of planning. That's why there are not international markets today. Till today, you talk about desert encroachment, right? You talk about erosion, ravaged areas. You talk about flooding. What has been happening to the ecological fund?
That's a matter for another day.
That's another big question.
Exactly. Back to the oil and gas industry. If you don't domesticate, when you have the population, then a given level of market is guaranteed.
All right. Now let me ask you. Let me ask you this, Bala. I remember when the Minister of State for Petroleum, Ibe Kachiku, when he was talking about the price of petrol that will hover between the 86 naira 50 kobo to 140. he didn't, or 145 rather, he didn't say the price is now going to be 140. He said it's going to, fluctuate between this and that. But as it is right now, can you say that the oil marketers are making profit from where we find ourselves right now?
Sure, they are making. But it's not out of place. They are businessmen. The only person that will protect, look, you don't expect businessmen to protect your citizens for you. Businessmen, first of all, collect what we call loans, and they are supposed to pay back what we call the cost of capital. Businessmen are supposed to leave. You cannot allow businessmen to continue to collect loans and become geared and you throw them into liquidation. The responsibility of protecting citizens of a country in terms of social activities, political activities, and economic activities rests with the government. So if you think whether because I'm a businessman and my interest is how to make Nigerians happy, I think you will get it wrong. It is the duty of government. Those people we elected or selected and handed over our economic, political, and social destiny for them to manage. And in the case of democratic cycles, we say,
but do we even know the actual price of of PMS with the petroleum pricing templates not even being out there?
With the situation in Nigeria, please let's stop deceiving ourselves. You will never know these things because of the exchange rate differentials. You cannot. A dollar.
Okay.
No, I'm serious. A dollar is a given amount today and is another given amount tomorrow. You will never know that. But if you Nairanize your economy, right, internal domestication is the key. You then know that you can get your crude oil from the wellhead in Naira. You would refine them in your refineries in Naira. Distribute it to Nigerians in Naira. There are enough Nigerians to consume them. Generate your Naira. You cut yourself off from exchange rate differentials. Internal domestication will always be the way. Whether you go to China, to US, to Canada, anywhere, they internally domesticate their economies and their productions. And that's the only way you can grow your GDP.
Okay, Naranization of that's a wonderful economic term there.
Try it and see what happens.
Okay, Bala Zakka, thank you very much for coming on the program this morning.
Thank you so much.
And Barka de Sala again.
Thank you.
All right.